Katie, and welcome to Nexus for Change webinar series. We're here today with Tuquynh, who's going to be talking about the role of T groups in graduate education from her experience at Stanford and the amazing work that they're doing out there. Welcome, Tuquynh. I'm glad you're here today.
Thanks, Steve, for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, this is great. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through your story and tell a little bit about T groups, and I think get into some really important topics around the role of it. I have a passion for this work, and what I really enjoyed was when you and I met, and a few months ago, I think it was, or maybe a month and a half ago, we were talking about, it's been more than that actually, when we were talking about T groups and your experience, I was like, we got to do a webinar on this. This is such an important area. And so let's go ahead and jump in and get started with your topic. John, if you could switch it over.
All right. So let's hit present here. Can everybody see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yep. Let's jump in.
Okay, great. Yeah, so like Steve mentioned, my name's Tuquynh Tran, and I'll be talking to you about how T groups have been an integral part of Stanford's MBA program and its success. And then I also will talk about my own personal experience with T groups and how I believe that T groups should be incorporated into all graduate level education. And so I'm excited that many of you are from the education sector. So just before we get started, I'd like to give you a little background about me. I began my career as a mechanical engineer in a manufacturing environment where my main focus was always on the production process, how to make the process leaner, how to eliminate waste, looking at systems and making things more efficient. And while I enjoyed doing that work, I was always interested in the people side of things, like how to motivate people, why were some people resistant to my ideas or the changes that I want to make, how did I deal with conflict, so on and so forth. And so when I went back to grad school to get my MBA, in 2009 I took an emotional intelligence course, and it was taught using T groups. And if you don't know what T groups are, the T stands for training groups. And what I took away from that learning experience, not only transformed my career in moving from more systems change to looking at people and how people behave, but it ultimately transformed my marriage and also how I live my life. And so I'm really passionate about this work, and I truly believe that it could be a great learning tool. And so when I moved to the Bay Area, I became a facilitator at Stanford. And I want to continue with this work and have and bring it to more other educational arenas to have a greater impact. So that's why.
Yeah,
go ahead, Steve.
And I was going to say that I think that relates to when we think about what the interest is in learning more about T groups and the people here today, our audience. You see the percentages here around these 5 different reasons people came.
Right.
Interest. So it must read this. I would imagine these 5 relate to what you care about, what you think is important in sharing. Could you speak a little bit to each one of these and your thoughts on them?
Yeah. So can you show me the poll again? I don't know how to get to the poll.
Well, I'll read them to you. I'll read it to you. So the first one is gaining self-knowledge and personal development. 14% picked that.
Yeah. So I'll definitely talk about how I have gained knowledge and how that has played into my marriage and also in my career. Obviously, it really enhanced my personal relationships outside of work in terms of my friends, my family. I believe the third one is about teams at work, right?
The third one is building high-performing teams.
Yeah, and this one is, I was thinking more about, if you want to go into management in terms of leading a team and what is high performance looks like.
And then there's increasing organizational effectiveness as a whole.
Right, and that one is geared towards more OD practitioners and how coming in as a change agent into an organization and actually being able to influence it on more of a systems level.
And then the last one here is creating an experiential-based learning program. This is what 43% of the people here today picked.
Right, and this is where I think my passion for T groups is that I want to have a greater impact, and one of the ways to do that, I think, is to bring more T groups into other graduate level programs around the country and hopefully around the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're back to your screen with your picture of you.
All right. So let's get a bird's eye view of the lay of the land here for the rest of the webinar. Whenever people ask me what I do for a living and I tell them, the most common reaction that I get is, wait, what? Why is T groups important in higher education? What is it that you do? So I'll start there in terms of saying why T groups and why at Stanford. I'll go into talking more about what a T group is, why it's designed that way, and then focus in more about the types of learning that can come out of T group and specifically the key takeaways that I have gained from doing it. And then lastly, I'll talk about, if you want to get a T group going, what are some of the key things that you want to think about. And then we'll end with questions and answers at the end. So we did that poll question about the interest. I have another poll question if you want to pull up, Steve, and that's around based on what you know of T groups today, do you think T groups should be used in any and all graduate level programs?
Mm-hmm. And when I listened and heard your story, and I think about it, it's being used in an MBA program called a Touchy Feely class. I was really surprised at the success that you've had, but I also was also inspired by the story of helping it to become a part of that, because it wasn't a walk in the door and say, hey, let's do it, and everybody goes, great, T groups, put them in our MBA, that kind of thing. What the group is saying here is, what the audience is sharing is, I'll share the results right here, is that 62% agree and 38% are not sure, and we have an audience that's open to the possibility or supports the possibility.
Ah, this is great. So maybe I don't have to do a lot of convincing, but just maybe tell my stories.
I would say so. I think I would imagine that people that say that they're not sure or agree could really use some help in being able to explain it and help others understand the importance of it. And the people that aren't sure probably need a little help being more confident that it is practical, useful, and it's important to have as a part of a program, and part of a person's life in a program.
Ah, good point, Steve. So let's move on and talk about the impact that it has on Stanford. It is through the business school, through the MBA program, and they have a course called Interpersonal Dynamics course, which students have actually coined and nicknamed it as Touchy Feely, and that is a well-known, unusual name that has been accepted in the business school. Even though this Touchy Feely course is an elective and it's not a required course for the students to get their MBA, still over 90% of the students take it. And this equates to 432 students every year that go through this course at Stanford. When we send out surveys to students, they consistently have voted this Touchy Feely course to be the #1 course that they've learned a lot from. And it's 40 plus years in running. Even alumni who come and talk to the incoming new students about the importance of the MBA education there, many of the alumni oftentimes recommend and this Touchy Feely course to students as the one course that have had a long-lasting impact on them, even many, many years after they've graduated from the program. So why do the MBA students say that this is the most important class that they have taken? I believe that it has to do everything with what they get out of it, which is a transformative experience. So typically when students come into the course, they have this transactional mindset of, you know, what specific tools or specific knowledge that I can get out of the class. And so students want to learn the tools on how to be more influential, tools about how they can be more assertive and confident in terms of their leadership style. Students want tools on how to be more patient in terms of their self-management or their self-regulation of their emotions and their feelings. They want to be receptive to other people's criticisms and the tools on how to do that. And I want to emphasize that the last bullet is very, very important to MBA students at Stanford. As they enter into the program, the number one advice that they're given from alumni is that the relationships they build during their 2 years there are very, very important for their professional career down the road. And so as a result, students put a lot of effort into networking and building those connections with each other. And so they really want to know the truth, quote unquote, the truth about how they're being perceived by their peers. And the underlying intrinsic need for this is, you know, acceptance and love and a sense of belonging. So after the course, after going through the Touchy Feely course, we ask students, you know, what they have gained at the end of their T group experience, and often a different theme emerged, which is that it was a transformational experience for them, which is the exact opposite of what they come in with. And so instead of speaking about the specific tools or techniques, we often find that students would talk about how they learned how to be a better friend or son or a husband or a wife. They talk about how some of their mental models have been dispelled as having firsthand experience of how showing vulnerability is seen as a strength and not a weakness. They would talk about all the connections that they've made with other people in such like a deep and meaningful way, and really what closeness, trust, and intimacy looks and feels like. And you know, and then they would talk about how did they get their needs met in terms of the process in which they got clarity and what they need and the ability to articulate that in a way that they would be understood and seen.
This is pretty interesting, and I'm curious what you all think out there in the chat room. A lot of people just in general, Tuquynh, have been saying, like Dr. Lynn has talked about coming full circle. She was involved in T groups back in the day in the PhD program with Ken Benny and Bob Chen, and formative for all of us in ODOT. Ken emphasized self as an agent of change, and then she said she had interpersonal group dynamics courses in her MBA at the University of Chicago back in the day, also very important. And other people have mentioned some stuff. But I think what's interesting is people come in saying, I want to be more influential, I want to be more assertive and confident, I want to be more patient and more receptive to criticism. And they walk out saying, I'm a better friend. I'm more vulnerable and strong and feel more confident. I would say I'm more strong in my vulnerability. I'm more able to connect better with others, and I'm better able to get my needs met in the world. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so I'm saying, like, they're coming in with wanting tools, and what they get out of it is this, like, unforgettable, memorable, meaningful experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I think that because of this memorable experience that it has such a long-lasting impact and an imprint on them as, you know, what they remember many years after graduating from the program.
Cool.
So I like to share with you a personal story of my own and practice vulnerability here because it's recorded. I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar that T groups have transformed my marriage. And so I'd like you to meet my husband here, Richard. So we met in college as mechanical engineering students, and you know, it was a major well-suited for the both of us in terms of our analytical minds and our problem-solving personality. And I would say we've been married for 10 years and we're happily married, but it didn't always start that way. 2 years into our marriage, we fell into a dysfunctional pattern of behavior. And so I was the blamer, the angry blamer who never listened. And Richard was the stonewaller who would, you know, immediately shut down whenever there was disagreement between the two of us. And I was aware of our struggles and our pattern around resolving conflict, but I was stuck in my own ways of behaving, and I did not know how to actually break out of this cycle. And it wasn't until I had my first T group experience in 2009. I remember in one session, I would immediately jump in to offer advice or a solution, as you know, any great engineer would do, whenever someone disclosed something personal or a problem that they were having. And my intention for jumping in was to show that, you know, I was actively listening and that I was being helpful, but the impact that I actually made was the exact opposite. I got feedback from people that they felt annoyed that I was being too advicey, or some people actually felt unheard by me, or others thought that I had completely dismissed what they were saying. And as a result, those people distanced themselves from me by shutting themselves down and not engaging with me as much in T group as they would for the other people. And at first, I was very defensive, but I was shocked at the feedback that I got from all these people. I was also shocked about the unintended impact that I had, which was not originally what I was trying to do, which was to connect. And the third wave of shock came, and it was very, very painful for me to experience, was that it hit really close to home in terms of my own marriage and what I was struggling with. And so from that T group experience, I learned to practice on how to really listen. And that night when I came home, you know, I sat Richard down and talked about why he thought I blamed him for everything. And all I did was I listened, I asked questions, I became incredibly curious. And we talked for 3 hours, and you know, the issue that we had was around the distribution of chores, and it got sorted out a few days later. But the process for us to get to the point where we could actually talk about it was much more collaborative this second time around after my T group experience. The big difference was that Richard didn't shut down, he didn't disengage, and it really helped us to break out of their dysfunctional pattern and profoundly change the way that we view and handle conflicts from that point on. And I want to say, you know, I'm telling you this story to say that it was a painful experience for me, but I got so much out of it, and it brought me closer to Richard as a result. And I want to say, you know, it's a constant work in progress, to say that we're always consistently learning, but how we approach the conflict without shutting down and being able to stay engaged was one of the most profound learnings that I gained from T groups.
How was Richard different from his experience? Jane wanted to know. She was curious about that.
Yeah, so Richard also ended up taking T groups as well, and for him, and I talked about with him last night to get him permission for me to share this story, was that he really learned how to talk about his emotions and feelings. And, one of the things that I discovered is that both him and I, that's why we were engineers by trade, we focus more on the problems as opposed to the underlying emotions. And so even though we were trying to solve problems, the underlying emotions was what was managing our marriage. And until those got addressed and talked about and acknowledged, we couldn't break out of that cycle.
Eric said it sounds like the T group allowed communication to open up and discuss what may have been previously non-discussable in a relationship. Yep. And he said, I can resonate with this too.
Yep. Yep.
Kim's curious about the T group process.
Yes, and we'll get there in a couple of slides. So I just want to say, with me and with other students too, is that T groups really help to increase your self-awareness. That's one of the biggest learnings. I think somebody asked earlier, what learnings can come out of T groups. And I want to say that it starts with enhancing your own awareness of first noticing what's happening with you in terms of your internal thoughts and feelings and being able to distinguish the two. I like this comment here to say, this participant who just did a sensitivity training comes up to an instructor at the end and says, you're better than my last sensitivity training instructor, but uglier. And the point is that I'm trying to make here is that, as you become more aware of yourself and your thoughts and your emotions, then the better that you'll get at being able to manage them and to be able to speak your truth and express them. And then in addition to noticing your internal thoughts and feelings, you can gain more awareness and learn about yourself by way of giving and receiving feedback. So in my experience as a facilitator, where I most see interpersonal conflict occur, and also in my marriage, is when there's a gap between a person's intention and the impact that they want to have on the other person. So the gaps can occur in 3 categories of information. The first is self-awareness, which is what and how I think about myself. The second area is self-perception, what and how I think others think about me. And then the third is actual perception, is what and how others actually think about me. Now, if your self-perception is the exact opposite of the actual perception of how others are viewing you, then that's where the disconnect happens. And it's one of the wonderful things about T groups is it allows you to test and check out your assumptions and perceptions with other people to see if they're in alignment. And I would say from...
I was going to say it's one of my favorite quotes is, I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am.
Wow, who said that? You didn't share that with me.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I would also have to say that the actual perception, especially in a corporate setting, is very hard to obtain. I remember when I became a manager and, I got the title and I got my own office, which was great, but then the next thing I knew, I felt pretty lonely and isolated from the rest of the team. I began to notice that people would never, especially the people who work for me, would never give me direct feedback, either negative or constructive. And then when I would ask for it, people would say, oh yeah, you're doing a great job, Tuquynh. Yeah, you're good. Oh, I have no problems. And so as a manager, it became concerning for me in terms of, well, how do I know I'm actually doing a good job? And how do I have enough information to say, of things that I need to work on or to improve. And so I think another reason why T groups is useful, especially in an education setting, is that you don't have a lot of those power dynamics going on in what you would experience in a hierarchical corporate organizational structure. And so the information that you're getting, like the feedback, can be more candid without any ramifications on how it would impact your career.
Interesting. So Dr. Lin said something here. She said her greatest learning was that she says, none of my feelings showed to others, as I was raised to be very poised, as my father was a military officer. I knew what I felt, but it took time to have that show.
Yep, yep. And I think, you know, a part of how we show up, too, is based on what we were raised with, right? To be what's right, what we ought to do, what we shouldn't do. And so then that creates a lot of mental models and how we should behave. But then those mental models can get in the way, right?
Mm-hmm. She also said that this reminds her of Chris Argyris' work, which showed leaders were inaccurate in predicting how others saw them.
Very good point. Yeah, and so at any time that you are on the receiving end of feedback, you know, the next question becomes, well, how do you respond to that feedback, and how do you respond appropriately? You know, I like this comic. Do you repent? Do you say you're sorry? Or do you try to fill in the holes that you dug up in the yard because what you said was, you know, boy, it was bad, it was really bad, and you need to do some sort of repair. In a more serious note is to say that T groups allows you to experiment with the way that you respond, whether it's to generate a connection, help you to make you feel closer to another person because of a mutual understanding, or it also could help you to realize, you know, maybe the way that you respond would push or distance yourself away from the other person. And all of this is just to say, you know, it's great data for you to have in terms of realizing choices that you have and how to respond. So I've talked a lot about, you know, the learnings that can come out of the T group, and so now I want to talk and shift a little bit more into the details of what is a T group. A little short background history is that, you know, T groups were developed by Kurt Lewin and his colleagues and NTL co-founders Ron Lippitt, Lee Bradford, and Ken Benet in the mid-1940s. Now, there are variations of T groups that are used out in business schools and other educational programs and workshops today. I just want to make a distinction and note that the model that I'm talking about here is specifically around my training and my facilitator experience at Stanford. So at Stanford, how we do it is that we have an unstructured group of 12 students, and we have 2 experienced facilitators. And in each T group session, we all sit around in a circle, in chairs, and there's nothing in the middle of the circle, no tables, no nothing. By design, the T group initially lacks 3 characteristics that are necessary for a group to function. So there's no agenda or set task, other than, you know, the ambiguous assignment of we're here to build a learning group. There's no established rules on how to proceed, and there's no formal leader. So the faculty and the facilitators will not fill this role of the leader. There's no person that's going to be in front of the room that's going to run the show while the participants are sitting back and listening. And so sitting in a group in a circle signals that we're all members of this group, and in some ways we are starting on a member equal level footing. So if the facilitators are not leading, quote unquote, leading or taking charge of running the T groups, then what is their role? And I would say at Stanford, the facilitator, we would call ourselves as a super member, which means that we participate as a member of the group, but we have 3 additional goals. And those goals are, the first is openness. We like to walk our talk, and so we have to model appropriate behaviors through the effective use of ourselves in service of the group. And that means just, showing up, and whenever we have reactions or feelings, that we would share them and disclose them. The second is around environment in terms of, as super members, we want to support others' learning goals in helping to create conditions that are conducive to learning and experimenting for students to, learn how to build relationships that they want with each other. And then the third, I would say, is our impact, is how do we come in and intervene at the individual, interpersonal, and group levels to draw out the learnings for the members and for the group. And all of this happens based on the design assumptions of how T group is structured. The first assumption is that the focus of the learning here is by doing. It's on the process itself and not the content. And so unlike other graduate level courses, where you provide conceptual theories or students have to do case studies or role play type of simulation, a lot of the learning in T groups occur by trial and error based on, what's happening in the moment. And that is more risky. It means that unless all 14 people want to sit in a circle and not say anything for 3 hours and have nothing happen, it means that people have to take risks, say something, try something out to have something happen. And so in a sense, it's the purest form of learning that, students are learning how to learn. And the same with the facilitators as well, because no T group is going to be the same, because the people who make up the T group are never the same.
So a word that keeps coming up in the discussion group is this notion of vulnerability and strength.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people must associate vulnerability with weakness.
Yes.
And when you're sitting in a group and you're seeing people have to, it's more risky.
Right.
Is the risk? What's the risk around vulnerability, and how do they find what happens when they? Have you seen people kind of find that moment where they realize vulnerability is not as risky as they thought?
Yeah, I would say that it's a process to get there. A lot of the students would say, at the beginning of T group, when they're not taking enough risks or saying stuff, they would say that they're bored, because nothing's happening in T group, but in reality, they are making a choice individually to not take a risk. But in taking a risk to speak up, I mean, there's vulnerability in that maybe whatever you said will be rejected, or whatever idea that you post to the group, everybody's going to think it's the stupidest idea that you could come up with. I mean, so there's a lot of vulnerability around, putting yourself out there to get the group, quote unquote, moving.
Another favorite quote is that the highest form, boredom is the highest form of self-interest.
Mm-hmm. But how do you get over that, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Or recognize, what does that mean? Boredom is the highest form of self-interest.
And what does that mean to you, Steve?
I think it means that we are responsible for our own. When someone sits in a room and says, "I'm bored," typically it's presented as it's everybody else's fault. You got to do something.
Right.
It's up to it's the group's fault. It's an external focus, as opposed to really shifting it and saying, "Look, boredom is your responsibility, not mine."
Right. Exactly.
And where I hear
And
people kind of step away from that a lot of times when they go, people that have that attitude when they go to a conference or a workshop, and they'll say, my goal is to find one or two things that really work and resonate with me, and I don't expect it to all be perfect, but I'm really seeking, I'm on a mission to find something worthwhile in this experience, as opposed to the experience having the responsibility of making itself worthwhile to me.
yes, and you know what? When a student takes and steps into that awkward moment of silence and say something like, I don't want to sit here and do nothing. I'm going to propose something. The interesting part is there's this sense of relief from the rest of the group that's like, oh, thank you for speaking up. I was feeling nervous or anxious that we're not doing anything. And so in some ways, for the person that's sitting there saying, should I speak up or not? Am I going to get rejected? But then when they do actually speak up, it's like everybody's relieved that they actually did it. And I think that juxtaposition is where the learning happens of, starting to dispel some of the mental models or some of the fears that you have with what is the actual reality. And then the other thing that I want to say is that, in a traditional classroom environment where you're learning a concept or a theory, sometimes you can try it out once or twice, and maybe it worked or maybe it doesn't work. But I think the key with T groups is that it allows you a lot of opportunities to experiment with behaviors over and over again. And that reminds me of Vincent Lombardi's quote that he says, practice does not make perfect, but perfect practice makes perfect. And the idea is that, you want to keep going back like the gym to flex your muscles, to practice your interpersonal skills. So with a group with no structure or task and no leader, how does the learning actually happen? And we touched about this, my first point, is that, the design of the T group purposely create what we would call an organizational vacuum to draw out the central interpersonal issues and group dynamic issues. If you think about it, no group can be successful without some type of, initiative, purpose of getting together, or norms about how people are expected to behave, whether they're explicitly stated or implicitly implied. And so in filling this vacuum that the T group format has deliberately created, group members typically feel some sort of internalized pressure to reduce the ambiguity, as we talked about, by working out issues in the here and now. And so some of the questions that comes up is, okay, guys, what do we do now because the facilitators aren't giving us any instructions? How do we make decisions as a group? What does it take to feel accepted around here? Can I share whatever I want to say or I have in my mind, or well, I'm going to be judged negatively for it? And so, these are the types of questions that I would make the argument that we often ask ourselves all the time. But it only occurs in our heads. For example, when we enter into a new group environment, like starting a new job, or when we're meeting our significant other's family for the first time, and it's, oh my God, it's awkward and nerve-wracking. Or, we show up to a retreat not knowing anybody, and it seems like everybody else knows each other. So T groups allow students to really experiment with all of those questions in a safe environment, in a safe container, and to be able to do it freely and openly. Google published an article in the New York Times about a year ago about what they've learned in building the perfect team. And they talked in that article about how to create psychological safety, which they defined it as, and I quote them, a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. A sense of confidence that the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up. So it takes trust to do that, and a large part of the group process is learning how to build conditions for the psychological safety to occur. And this is really important whether you're a manager, whether you're a OD practitioner going into do consulting into a group that doesn't have psychological safety. I mean, these are the skills of saying how can you build it up as yourself so that you can show up and use yourself as an instrument to create that safety for others. And then the last I would say is, you know, T groups allow for the learnings to be extrapolated in what I call the inherent wisdom of the group, that the group knows and sees things that maybe I have blind spots about myself. And to be able to get that data would help me to increase my own awareness. And I would say, you know, I have learned a lot about myself over the past 8 years of being a part of T groups, both as a member and also as a facilitator. And here are my top 4 key takeaways from T group. The first is, you know, understanding when and how I'm, what I'm doing to gain or lose influence. One of the assumptions that I had mentioned before that's very typical of other students as well was, you know, I always viewed vulnerability as a sign of weakness in terms of showing anger or showing sadness or, you know, showing tears in public. When in fact I discovered the opposite was true. And one of the biggest realization I had was that on the times that I took the risk to be vulnerable, it was very connecting to other people, and it gave them permission to do the same with me. I also recognized what my dominant behaviors are in terms of my leadership and communication styles, and learning what I want to do with that. For example, I tend to stay really quiet in group settings when conflict, you know, happened because I had this fear that, you know, if I speak up, I'm going to get rejected somehow. And as a result, you know, I didn't have a lot of influence. I didn't get my needs met. My ideas weren't being honored because, one, I didn't even disclose what I wanted. And so over the years, I've learned on how to be more direct and how to initiate and have difficult conversations. And so I increased my capacity to find comfort in those difficult situations. And, you know, I mean, that starts with disclosing my intentions, sharing my feelings, and my thoughts. And it's a practice of stepping into that discomfort zone that I became more aware of the emotional triggers that I have. And when I became more conscious of what my triggers are, I was able to self-soothe myself and calm myself down in the midst of those conflict times to realize that I have different choices here about how I want to show up. And this really was like a big aha moment when I realized that I don't have to be reactive in the moment. I can take a much more proactive approach to slow things down and to make conscious choices, because that reduces the chances of me saying something that I would later regret, or saying something that I did not mean in the moment because I was extremely flooded. And so those are my 4 key takeaways, and we have about 7 minutes left here, and so I'll end my presentation with saying, you know, what are the things that you need to think about if you want to get a T group started. The first, I would say, and the most important, is that, you know, for you to have an experience of the T group itself so that you're familiar with the body of work. The next step after that is to get trained to be a facilitator. And there are places like NTL where you can definitely get that training. Once you're trained and you have another trained facilitator and you want to run a T group, you'll have to decide on the structure of the program. You know, I've seen and been a part of anywhere from a 3-day retreat, weekend retreat style, or you can do like a 5-day intensive, or a quarter or a semester long course. At minimum, though, you need to have or build in 20 hours of T group time for the experience to be meaningful to the participants. And at Stanford, our Touchy Feely course runs the full gamut of the entire quarter, which means that students are getting approximately 80 hours of T group time that's spread over 10 weeks. So the more time the participants have in spending in actual T group, then the deeper they'll be able to go and explore and learn from one another. And the last thing that I want to say is that it's going to be really important to build a diverse community of facilitators to make your T group program sustainable. If you think about it, every T group, you'll need 2 facilitators. So if you want to scale up and have run multiple T groups, then you have to account for 2 times 2 facilitators for each group. At Stanford, we foster the facilitator community by offering, you know, ongoing trainings and workshops and opportunities for facilitators to get together, to build upon one another's skills, to bring in new techniques or experiences and be able to talk about it. And that just enriches our ability to do our work. So if you are interested in getting a program or a course going, you know, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can definitely give you a lot more details.
Cool. There's a couple comments here that are pretty interesting in the discussion room, and one of them is Dr. Lynn she was wondering, are current T groups all negative feedback, or is there appreciation for one's strength as well, or also?
It is I mean, I focus on my experience and the negative because I was a lot of work. I was a piece of work. But, you know, I mean, there are positive feedback as well. It's not all negative. It depends on what the students want to work on. I mean, there are times in T groups where students would say, you know, they have a hard time expressing warmth or affection. And so it feels weird or awkward for them if they don't know how to do it in a way that doesn't come across as weird. And so they would work on giving affirmations or positive feedback to other people. So it just depends on what the students want to work on.
And Eric said, he said that in my T group experience, feedback has been both positive and negative and always framed as such. When giving feedback, always intentional, meant to surface a blind spot in another, speaking in terms of Johari window concept. So for me, it has raised things to improve on or things I didn't know I was even great at.
Yep. And I think that, yeah, I mean, I think that that's the spectrum that you would get from a T group that typically in other settings you might not get that full range.
Yeah, and Ken Benny's, Dr. Lynn said, Ken Benny was very strong on asking us all to do our inner work, be in counseling, clear our issues, so we could be fully there for clients, not trip over our own triggers. Some of the best advice I ever had.
Mm.
And
And
Stuart, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tuquynh, and then I've.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay, Stuart sent in a question. He just said, given that all organizations are moving towards collaborative work, he said that a few years ago a study of Harvard MBAs 10 years out revealed that more than 80% surveyed said that if they knew that working in an organization really was, they would have spent more time studying psychology and communication and less on finance and decision sciences. So this is essential. And his question was, what have been the obstacles towards building a successful program?
I think for me, and it took Stanford, I would say about 10 years to really get the program going in terms of the sustainability of it, is actually having a community of facilitators and facilitators who are trained to do this particular work. I think that's like the biggest obstacle.
Interesting.
Cool. And there's another one from Valerie. I think this is just a comment, but perhaps we can chat about it. She said she knows that this is used for higher education, but is it possible to use this for junior high and high school students? She said she's a substitute teacher, but can see the potential for this at those grade levels.
Yeah, one of the lecturers or professors that I was trained in doing this work at Stanford, he said that his first T group experience started when he was 14 years old. So I think that it is. I have not had any experience with it, but I think for high school students it would be great. I mean, I think about my own high school time and how rebellious I was with my parents, that it would have been helpful. I'm not quite sure how to answer about anything younger than high school, just because I wonder if the students have a way of actually expressing their emotions fully and being able to articulate it.
I would offer that it could be, and I think there are practices that have elements of T groups in them for very young kids, even preschool, that are helping kids understand their emotions and understanding how to identify emotions. You know, a lot of the research on emotional intelligence suggests that most of emotional intelligence is formed by the age of 7 or 8 years old.
Mm.
And so there's a lot of research on the trajectory in early childhood is that a lot of the work done with kids that are between 0 and 4, a lot of trajectory in their life path is impacted during that early childhood experience, which I think has a lot to do with the ability to express emotions, understand one's emotions and those of others. And so I would say that, and from what I'm seeing in other work with children, helping children to understand bullying and working on it earlier than later, and helping them to be more aware and giving each other feedback. A lot of times in the emotional intelligence work in classrooms, a lot of the interventions now that are being done in classrooms, kids are sitting in circles and they're talking about the impact of behaviors on each other and how they can interact with that behavior. So a kid might be acting out, and the teacher will sit there with the whole group and say, well, what was that like for you, and how can you react to that, and then what can you do the next time so-and-so does this or that, and they talk about it in the group with that person there, and they talk to each other.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's definitely, I'll have to look into that, because now I'm even more excited that, you know, we can do T groups in a wider range of age range and not just in graduate level education. That's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I know we're wrapping up, and for people that might be leaving, we're going to take a couple minutes so we don't have a hard, fast, kind of abrupt stop. I want to kind of ease out of our conversation, and it'll be recorded, and many people that have to go can come back and listen to the ending if they need to leave. This has been very good, lots of nice comments in the chat room, and I'd love to hear what people out there are saying is your takeaway. What's the thing that you're still questioning, and how are you doing as you're leaving? We've got a poll question here. I'll put that out as well. So let me do this here. Here's the poll. After learning more about T groups today, I am more inclined to support using them in graduate education. And I'm curious what you all think now as you're listening today, and where are you with this? While people are filling this out, I wanted to tell you, Tuquynh, that Jim said, so this was a question, how would you do this in an online MBA program? That's a very interesting, can you create a T group type of experience in an online? And I think you can. It just looks different. What are your thoughts?
I also see the possibility, and I also I wonder if that is going to, because you lose a part of the being together in terms of connection. And so I have never run it online. Typically we would do some work and getting to know each other online, and then we would come together in a retreat setting.
Okay, yeah, and then let's see here. Kim said this was very informative and thought-provoking. Thank you for presenting today. Kim said she also wants to be part of one very soon. Kim is local, and just to let you know, Kim, that the MOD program at Bowling Green State University, where I'm a member, and Jane, who's here today, is a faculty member as well. We're holding one for the current cohort, and they're going to be opening it up and inviting others to be a part of it. So if you want to join that and be a part of it, you can. I think it'll be up to the group, but I think it's going to open up. Jane said thank you. It's a great refresher. Dr. Lynn said could do online if all one can see. And hold on one second. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. Hold on one second.
I think while Steve's away, I'll take this opportunity to talk to you guys and give a shameless plug for the ISODC session that's coming up next week that Nexus is going to be a part of, and we're dealing with implicit bias from Roland Livingston from the International Society for Organization Development and Change, and we'll send that out with the recording from today's session in our follow-up email. So thanks you guys for being here, and Tuquynh, thank you so much. What a great topic. I really appreciate it, and I learned a lot.
Me too. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you for having me. I said thank you for having me. This was very fun, and I hope to bring it to Bowling Green and to spread the word about T groups. So.
Cool. So I'm going to wrap up, and we see that the poll is 94% agree and 6% are not sure. So I think people feel more informed and more confident about it. And I'll just wrap up here with a few final comments, and then we'll say goodbye. So Jim says thank you. Tracy says thank you. Thanks, TNT. I always enjoy spending time with you. That's from Jen. Jan said I would be knowing of an opportunity in the central area too. Thanks. Gail said very interesting that this can be done over time instead of a multi-day event. Sarah said check out the concept of deliberately developmental organizations, Robert Keegan. Any locations in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area? So ask Tracy, and it's the concept of T groups with writ large on culture. Said Sarah, thank you, and thanks, says Eric. Great to be part of this community. So with that, Tuquynh, what's your final comment and bye, and then we'll say goodbye for now.
Yeah, I'm just so glad to be here with you all and to share my work, and I hope that I could do more sessions about T groups and dive deeper into more subjects about T groups later on. So thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Okay, and everybody, thank you, and John, thanks for all your help, and so everybody have a great rest of the day, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.